A delve into the depths of insanity. A 600 microgram LSD trip report sent in by BW. Pretext. This trip occurred at roughly age 20. Having just celebrated my birthday and wanting to go on a trip to remember, my friend and I, we'll call him G, picked up 6 tabs of double-dipped LSD, about 200 micrograms each. Having taken LSD about 10 times before, and mushrooms about 7 to 8 times, I considered myself ready to delve deeper into the depths of hallucinogenic substances. We obtained the tabs around 8 PM and went back to my house, as my parents had just left for their vacation. With an empty house and a ready mind, I took 1 tab while G took all 3 at once. Trip report. After about 30 minutes of no noticeable effects, I also decided to take the rest of the tabs to reach the level my friend was about to experience. Little did I know, at the time, this would prove to be quite the mistake. About 10 minutes later after taking the extra 2 tabs, the first effects began to hit. I noticed a subtle yet defined increase in my focus on my surroundings. Everything began to seem more vibrant, but I was not seeing any patterns yet. I was leaning back in a reclining chair inside of my living room, when a peculiar halo of colour began emanating from the TV we were watching. My friend G had just put on a National Geographic documentary, but as I leaned forward in my chair to take a closer look, I suddenly detached from my physical body, and in my leaned forward state, it still felt as though I was still leaning back against the chair with my arms crossed behind me. This immediately triggered a surge of anxiety, as at this point it was roughly 45 minutes after taking the first tab. I knew at this point that I was in for the ride of a lifetime, and attempted to calm myself down. However, realising that I was still leaning forward, yet my brain ascertained the fact I was still leaning back in the chair, my perception began to fizzle, and my heart began to race. I looked over to G, and could see the acid was already beginning to take full effect, as all he could do was stare at me blankly in response to the questions I was asking him. I wish I could give a timescale of the events yet to come, but less than an hour after taking the first tab, time lost all relative meaning. With my friend lost in an eternal 1,000-yard stare, I began to take in my surroundings. Things were beginning to shift and move as if they were aspirating, yet far more intense than I could have imagined. I was rapidly losing all sense of myself as my breathing and heart rate only continued to increase. I asked G if he wanted to step outside for a moment for a breath of fresh air, and he nodded in agreement. We got up and walked in the direction to my back porch, and that is when all perceptual hell broke loose. The door leading to my patio seemed to stretch back into infinity, and every step I took towards it seemed to last forever. After what felt like several minutes trying to walk 20 feet, we finally made it to the door. As soon as I turned the handle, it was as if a gateway to another dimension opened up. My vision splintered into what I can only describe as looking for a chain-link fence. I looked up at the sky, and in each individual square of the link, powerful fractals began spiralling back and forth as if looking straight through a kaleidoscope. It was instantaneously overpowering, and I felt myself fall forward only to catch myself on the railings, as the force of the spinning vortexes threatened to suck me in. I looked at G, speechless, and went to open the door to go back inside. As I reached for the handle, it seemed to fade away into nothingness. I was completely floored by the power of what I was feeling, and kept reaching further and further for a door handle that was rapidly evaporating into itself. In reality, we were both most likely standing in front of the door with our hands outstretched, but it was like trying to move inside of a tornado. Wisps of colour and energised air shot around me as I struggled just to reach out and grasp the freaking doorknob. As soon as my hand finally connected with the cold metal, it was as though time had stopped. The door swung open, and the rush of cold air from the air conditioning was like walking from a desert to the Arctic Circle. We made our way back through the house with great difficulty, straight hallway mind you, and returned to the chair we began from. Things only elevated from here though. The National Geographic documentary was still playing, but nothing perceivable was presented to my eyes. A cheetah flashed across the screen, but all I saw was a blur of movement passing through a scene of utter chaos. The waving Sahara grass presented itself as burning flames, and the blue sky melted into it as if it were a candle burning at its peak. Everything I looked at was melting. The walls, the floor, my body, all of it was melding into itself and withering away into ash. I stumbled my way to the bathroom, looking for any form of relief, but there was nothing that could help me now. I looked up and saw myself in the mirror, but I couldn't recognise anything. I was being completely blown into a realm of pure terror and insanity. Time meant nothing, and every second was dragged out for hours, as I witnessed myself dissolve into the mirror over and over again, only to be returned to my physical form, and then stretched out again into a focal point I could not discern. I pulled myself out of the bathroom after what felt like days of breaking down into molecules in front of the mirror, and was thrown into a spiral staircase. The hallway connecting to my bathroom led into the living room and looped back through the kitchen and back into the bathroom. I became lost in this nightmare cycle of walking in literal circles at what felt like a 45-degree angle leading straight down into what I perceived to be hell. I must have walked 20 or 30 circles before my friend suddenly popped out behind a wall and grabbed me and silently pointed towards my room. I half stumbled, half crawled my way into my bed, and G soon joined me. What happened next, I will never be able to explain. As soon as I lay down in my bed, my brain folded in on itself. I turned what felt like 720 degrees around my brainstem before I lost all form of vision and my mind was overtaken by a blank grey screen. In this blank canvas, a huge hexagonal pillar spiralled forth, covered in every sensory organ a human contains. Eyes, ears, noses and tongues covered the pillar as it sprung forth into my mind and began seeing, hearing, feeling and smelling every experience I had ever had up until this point. I felt the tongues lick across my being, eyes pierce deep into the veil of my existence, the ears listening to every thought I've ever had, and the noses sensing scents deep within my memory. I became the embodiment of perception, reliving countless moments in time where I didn't even consider the impact of my ability to sense, and felt everything I was existing within. I began to writhe and scream as memories were ripped from my consciousness and dissolved into thin air, as if flies from my brain were being sent to the recycling bin of a computer and then deleted. I begged for the feelings to stop, until out of this pillar of oblivion, a hand extended its reach. It was G grabbing my hand and telling me everything was going to be okay, and at this utterance, the pillar dissolved, and I saw what appeared to be a heart monitor line begin beeping at a constant pace, before going dim and flatlining. I heard an overpowering beeping, and all I could bring myself to do was ask G, "Are we dying?" He told me no, and the reassurance of another being's existence brought me back, if only for a moment. We were finally able to get back on our feet and proceeded again to the living room. Sat down in the chair, a pure manifestation of being humming with the tone of the universe itself. It was then I experienced what I consider the true revelation of my trip. After I sat down, I began to weep of human suffering. Death and the end of life swept over me like a colourless wave, and I begged God to be able to see my mother and father again. As I wept, a figure emerged before me and took me up in its arms. As soon as I felt its hold, I suddenly felt the most peace I have ever felt in my life. I looked up at the figure, and it appeared to be female, but it had a blank face and I could only perceive its form. Once this feeling of peace encompassed my being, I was sat down like a schoolchild at a desk and I heard the words, "Let me teach you of this life, my child," resonate through my core. They weren't spoken, rather communicated through a surge of spiritual energy, and I felt my soul vibrate to the frequency emanating from this mysterious entity. I was shown a vision of a wave, much like those of the ocean, but instead, it consisted of energy lines defined as varying colours of radiant light. I watched this wave begin and gain momentum as it continued, until finally crashing into a shore, stopping and then receding. I felt as though I'd just watched the ending of a life, until another wave crashed onto the shore, and then another. I heard, or rather felt, the entity state, "Life comes in the form of waves. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end, yet that does not stop the other waves from coming ashore as well." I watched in repeated procession, as wave after wave crashed onto the shore, coming to the conclusion that we are all waves, gathering energy as we move along, until finally we meet the end and our energy is absorbed and washed away, only to start the cycle again and again. This probably isn't exactly what I heard or witnessed, this is just my recollection afterwards. After taking this in, I was no longer worried about death as I was before. I became at peace with the thought that we are all waves of energy, and after we die, that energy does not disappear, but becomes part of a new wave. As quickly as this entity came, she vanished, and the mortal desire to drink water became an overpowering sensation. I got up and decided I needed a drink of water. As soon as I stepped in my kitchen, it was as if I had just walked out into the Milky Way galaxy itself. The lights of my kitchen appliances were projecting into my field of view as a massive spiraling galaxy. I saw the individual stars twinkle as this celestial mass rotated within my kitchen, and I could all but gaze at its magnificence. Found a cup on the counter and proceeded to fill it with water and drink the whole thing, only to forget I had just drank the cup of water and remind myself I needed it. I must have consumed at least 7 to 8 full glasses of water before I realised I'd been drinking this whole time. This began the last leg of the journey of my insane trip. I rejoined G in the living room, who was sitting silently watching the documentary series that must have been playing for hours past this point. I sat down and joined him in the revelry, and a particular episode called After Dark had begun, where it showed the activities of nature that occurred by night. I watched in awe as I became a leopard stalking its prey in the shadow of night. I felt the terror of being a seal pup crying out for its parents in complete darkness, hoping to hear the fated response. I became a colony of meerkats, preparing a new tunnel system for its newborns. I even became an owl using its precise night vision to swoop in on unsuspecting vole. For the next hour or so, I lived the life of the animals we witnessed on the screen, until my dog came into the room demanding to be let out. This brought me back to some semblance of reality, which had meant absolutely nothing to me this entire time. The come down came quickly, and soon I felt myself residing within my own body again. The last residual effects were quite pronounced, however. G pointed at a spider residing within its web on my back porch as we stepped back out onto the patio, which by now almost 10 hours had passed. I looked at the spider, and I could feel the energy it emitted radiating into the world as an aura of existence. At this sight, I realised I could sense the energy of all living things around me. The grass, trees, and all of the tiny insects around me all flowed with an interconnected force that was so powerful I was brought to tears yet again. After an hour or two of a few more residual effects and breathing patterns, I returned to a sense of somewhat normalcy. It took roughly 2 days after, however, to feel myself fully again. This was especially pronounced within 24 hours after the trip, as I felt as though I couldn't even begin to communicate or interpret what I had experienced. Conclusion: absolute insanity. It was far more devastatingly powerful than I anticipated. After this experience, I gained a profound appreciation for all forms of life, and have completely altered my perception of death itself. I haven't tripped since this moment, but I still feel the itch every now and then. All I can say is, be very careful where you think your limits are set, and always be aware that hallucinogens such as LSD and shrooms can be far too powerful to handle. I'm glad I experienced this trip, but at the same time I remain horrified at the prospect of ever returning to such a state again. Be safe, folks. BW.